Welcome back to another edition of Research Fantasy presents the NBA DFS Fantasy Baller edition for 3/3/2017. It's hard to believe that we are already 3 days into March. It's even harder to believe that we're already in March, but it's where we're at. Last night was a pretty good day for our core plays. Jimmy Butler had a very nice game. Russell Wesbtrook had a very nice game. Frank Kaminsky had a decent game. The rebounds weren't there, which was very interesting. Ultimately, early in the fourth quarter, he suffered a shoulder injury that is going to keep him out of Saturday's game. So, yeah, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. I think there's a song out there to that notion. Today, though, we're going to try to set everybody up for a perfect 3 out of 3. And we're going to go back to the well on this one, and we're going to start things off with Russell Westbrook. 23-4 on FantasyDraft, 13K on FanDuel, 13-1 on DraftKings. And listen, I get it. He's expensive. It's a 10-game slate. The argument is going to be made that you can just pick players at at a cheaper price point and probably get ahead. I'm not going to go that route, and this is coming from someone who typically does use that strategy when Westy is on the slate. I typically always look for players who, when I build my lineup, cash game or tournament, it's almost the same mentality. I'm looking at a guy with a safe floor who I think can get me 5x, but still sits in a position to get me 6 or 7x when we're talking about FanDuel or DraftKings. Let's call it 3 to 4x on FantasyDraft. So Westbrook typically doesn't fall in that measurable for me because he's good to hit 5, but not really great to go past that all the time because it's not very easy to go past 65 fantasy points. Well, tonight's a little bit different, and all the evidence I would ask you to look at is last night with Kemba Walker, the previous game with Mike Conley, and with Kemba Walker, we know that his home road splits are really skewed. He's a much better player inside the confines of his own stadium, and he just put up a 50-point game against the Phoenix Suns. So I have no doubt with Victor Oladipo almost certainly out this evening, Alex Albrinas just completely ineffective, and there has to be some concern about Enes Kanter. There's been nothing posted, but the last possession he was on the court, he was running down the court holding his forearm, and I could see when Westbrook was shooting the free throw shots that he was on the bench and the trainer was looking at that forearm. With this being a back-to-back and him coming off a forearm injury, you have to think that the Thunder might play it a little bit conservative here and sit him out. If that's the case, you've basically got the Thunder's 2 and 3 options off the floor, which A, opens up a ton of value, but B, means Russell Westbrook is going to do work. And we could easily see a 75-plus point game. He hit 65-ish points on DraftKings last night, and that didn't include any, accentuators for double-double or triple-double. So if he's able to hit that mark tonight, we're looking at 68 points based off of what he did yesterday, which is still fine, but I think there's much, much, much more upside to be had there. So he's my core play. I'm going to drop him in at least 50% of my tournament lineups tonight. Let's move on to a guy, the last two actually will be guys who I think are going to rebound, both literally and metaphorically, from what they did in the last games. And let's start off with Dario Saric of the Philadelphia 76ers taking on the New York Knicks. The Sixers, they are what they are, and you could look at the matchup against Miami and almost immediately tell that was going to be difficult for them, if for no other reason than the fact that Miami plays a different brand of basketball. So do the Knicks, and that brand of basketball is not good. I think that Saric, who did see his price drop, even if it's a couple of hundred, that is a big deal. That really helps you in terms of what his potential upside could be. I think that Dario Saric should be able to dominate this Knicks team. I don't worry about Kristaps being back in the lineup. To me, that's not really something that scares me away. He's not a great defensive player. In my opinion, I think that you can still beat him pretty easily, and it's just going to be a volume situation for Dario. So He's a good play in my mind, sitting at $14K on FantasyDraft, $7,300 FanDuel, $7,400 DraftKings. Let's move on to honestly probably my favorite play of the day. I'm really excited about this guy in this matchup because this is as pace up as it possibly gets. This guy gets very little love in the daily fantasy community, and I'm speaking about none other than the center of the Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert. Dude is pretty solid. I mean, the entire team stunk it up last time, so there's, a reason why his stats don't look good for that game. But up until that point, he had been producing pretty solidly. I cannot imagine a situation where the Nets are going to roll into Utah and the Jazz won't be able to take advantage of that matchup. I think the thing I like most here is the fact that the Nets have been sneaky good the past 2 games, and one of those games is against Golden State at Golden State. No, I take that back. That was in Brooklyn. But they did just come in to Sacramento and beat the Kings, who are awful, I'll give you that, but they're staying competitive. Now, the Jazz are a different type of team than the Warriors, a different type of team than the Kings. This is one of the most defensively sound teams in all of the NBA. But I think that they're going to be able to keep it close enough that Gobert should be able to absolutely feast. I like Brook Lopez in situations. He's not going to be able to out-rebound Gobert. Booker's not going to be able to out-rebound Gobert. This is a situation where you can be looking for a 15-17 5-block night from Gobert, and if the game stays close, I mean, you could be talking about numbers that are bigger than that. He's a high upside play tonight at his price, 13.7 on FantasyDraft, 75 on FanDuel, and 73 on DraftKings. I think you could do a lot worse. Moving on from there, we'll hit our value options last night, and guys, I encourage you to go listen to the video if you haven't from last night, because pretty much everything I said when it came to the value plays was 100% on point. I don't like to toot my own horn, but I will. I'll also take responsibility when I say something and it doesn't pan out. You can listen to the videos in the past. I've eaten Jimmy Butler. My words on him, not him physically, because that's just gross. But I've really, you have to do that. You have to be accountable if you're going to sit in a position where people are listening to what you say. But it was all right. I said that Rajon Rondo is trustworthy, but he's going to come in at some point, get a technical foul, 3 turnovers, 2 points, and 3 assists. First quarter, he came in at the end, 3 turnovers, a rebound, 3 fouls. Didn't see the floor until the end of the third quarter, and he played well from that point on, and he salvaged what could have been an absolutely terrible outing for him, but it just didn't make value. Yusuf Nurkic, Allen Williams were the options 2 and 3, and they just absolutely blew up. So I'm hoping we could keep that momentum rolling tonight. For my top play, I'm going to go back to the well with Allen Williams. 8,700 FantasyDraft, 4,900 FanDuel, 4,400 on DraftKings. And he's probably going to eat ownership alive tonight because of what he did yesterday. And with a young player like this, and a Russell Westbrook who likes to charge to the basket and could get this guy in a ton of foul trouble really, really, really quick, there is a high level of concern. So I don't think he's playable even at his price in cash games. But you can't deny a guy in 24 minutes who's putting up 16, 12, 1-and-1 stat lines. That's good for over 30 points on both fantasy sites. I think he's going to be a major force down the stretch. It wouldn't surprise me if 2 weeks from now he's sitting in the mid-6s with how he's playing, and he comes in as our overall top play of the night. OKC likes to play big. I mean, you got to take stuff like that into consideration. They're running a lot of sets, even on the bench, with Taj, Adams, Sabonis, or Cantor in. If they're running 2 of those guys at all times, the Suns are going to have no choice but to counter, and I could see Williams having minutes in the mid-20s again. Let's move on from there to another big guy that I think is in position to have a great game, even though it didn't pan out the first time these teams met, and that's Richaun Holmes of the Philadelphia 76ers against the New York Knicks. There's a lot to like about the Sixers in terms of value, and you could pretty much see where the production is coming from, and that's what you want in daily fantasy. You could pretty much count on Covington, Saric, McConnell most of the time, Gerald Henderson some of the time, and Richaun Holmes does a pretty good job because he has a pretty good role carved out for him. 9,500 on FantasyDraft, 4,600 FanDuel, 4,800 on DraftKings, and we're looking at a guy here who has 40-point upside if everything falls into place. Okafor, still a mental midget when it comes to the game of basketball, makes a lot of mental errors that result in fouls and cuts his time on the court short. The same can be said about Holmes, so there is some worry there. I think he's going to be fine here. I'm seeing about a 25-point floor from him tonight. I'm hoping that we see into the 30s, and I would expect high ownership on him as well. One guy I do not expect high ownership on, and I'm expecting some people to tell me that I'm just absolutely crazy for suggesting, but Rodney Hood has been ruled out tonight. This is a Nets team that gives up a lot of points, plays at an extremely fast pace. I don't think you should fault me for suggesting that Dante Exum at minimum price of $6K on FantasyDraft, $3K on DraftKings, and 3,600 on FanDuel might not be worth a look. He got 29 minutes in a blowout against Minnesota the other night, put up 20 fantasy points. You're sitting in a position where he needs about 20-ish points max to really make you feel good about putting him in your lineups. He's not the most consistent guy, and he can break your heart in a millisecond, but they've got to start working him into things if they think that he's someone that they want to keep around moving forward and build around. I think you could see maybe 25 to 30 minutes out of him tonight if things are going right, and he's at least a good bet in tournaments to go highly underowned but could return good value for the price you're going to pay. That ends it for our Friday edition of our DFS picks. Make sure to subscribe to this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to tell me I'm out of my mind, by all means, I'm always up for the lively debate and conversation. Leave a comment. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Check out what we have there. We're going to constantly be expanding what we're offering and who's contributing. Sign up for our NBA mailing list there so you can get our picks and advice on a daily basis in addition to these videos. Head over to Facebook, like us there, follow us on Twitter at Research and Win, and join us tomorrow for our next episode.